Okay, so in this video, we're going to be talking about demand. All right, so as usual, if you find these videos useful, please like and subscribe and share with your friends, colleagues, classmates, and leave a comment down below if you have suggestions for further videos. All right, so let's talk about demand. Now, the first thing to say about demand is one of the most basic economic hypotheses that you will encounter. It's basically at the foundation of a lot of the further work that you might do if you continue in economics in economic theory. And this is referred to as the law of demand. Okay? The law of demand says that all else being equal, okay, when the price of a good decreases, then the quantity demanded of that good, quantity demanded just means the amount of that good that consumers want to purchase, will go up. Okay? So the good becomes cheaper, people want to buy more of it. Okay? Super simple. Of course, the converse is that when the price increases, then the quantity demanded will decrease. Right? So this is the law of demand. Now, if you wanted to graph, okay, quantity demanded and price, how would that look given the law of demand? Well, in economics, as strange as this might be, and this is the case because of essentially a historical accident, we actually usually put price on the y-axis and we put quantity on the x-axis. That might seem strange. It might seem like quantity should really be on the y-axis and price should be on the x-axis, but this is just the convention, and you'll get used to it. Well, given this law of demand, we should have a downward sloping demand curve. Okay? Why downward sloping? Because as price decreases, quantity increases as per the law of demand. Therefore, the slope is downward sloping. Okay? Now, it's very important to understand exactly what this demand curve represents. Okay? This demand curve represents the quantity desired or the quantity demanded in the market as a whole at every price. Okay? So let's say we were talking about the market for running shoes. Okay? So this is the market for running shoes. Okay? Now, this could be within a country, within a city, whatever. Or maybe it's the entire market. It's the entire world. All right? Now, let's say the price of running shoes. Now, of course, this is a simplification, right? Of course, there are many different models of running shoes, different companies that make them, etc. Okay, but we're simplifying. Let's just assume that there's one market for running shoes, there's only one kind of shoe, and they all charge the same price. Or you could even look at this as average price, whatever makes more sense in your mind. But the point is, if the price of running shoes were this up here, let's say, call this P1, then the quantity demanded, okay, of running shoes would be Q1, okay? So when firms are charging P1 for running shoes, consumers want to buy Q1 pairs of running shoes. All right. Now, I just want to flag that this is different from the quantity that they actually buy. Okay, this is just the quantity that they want to buy. All right, and we'll see later why this is an important distinction. But for now, suffice it to say that this Q here represents desired purchases, not actual purchases. All right. Okay. What happens if the price drops to P2? Well, as per the law of demand, consumers will now want to buy more of the good, and they will want to buy Q2, right? That's an increase in quantity demanded. Okay, so this brings us to an important insight about the demand curve itself. The demand curve represents quantities desired at every price. Okay, now there are several prices represented along this demand curve, and there are several quantities represented along this demand curve. What the actual price and the actual quantity demanded will be at any given time will be determined by other factors, which we'll talk about later. Okay? The demand curve is a hypothetical. It's the answer to the question, if the price were a certain amount, what would the quantity demanded be? Okay? And the answer to that question for all the prices gives you the complete demand curve. Okay? That's what the demand curve is. Okay, so what might cause a shift along the demand curve? In other words, what might cause Q1 to go to Q2 or Q2 to go to some third price, Q3? The answer is a change in price. Okay? Changes in price cause movements along the demand curve. All right? Now, you'll see why I'm emphasizing this a little bit later on, but the point is the only thing that can cause our quantity to, a point to move along the demand curve here is a change in price. Okay, when prices change, quantity demanded changes. Now, it's important to flag that this demand curve exists in theory holding all else equal. Okay, so there are many things that might cause the entire demand curve to actually shift. We're going to get to that in a second. Okay, so what the demand curve is we're saying all else equal, okay, if price changes by so much, how much will quantity change by, etc. Economists often will translate this into Latin and use the term ceteris paribus, all else equal. Okay, so I'm going to be using that term because you'll be encountering that term a lot if you continue in economics. Ceteris paribus, all else equal. So this demand curve is a ceteris paribus representation of quantities demanded at various prices. Okay, so that's the demand curve. Now, I mentioned that there are some events that may actually cause the entire demand curve to shift. Okay, now what might those be? Let's draw a fresh demand curve here and explore some of those possibilities. Okay, we have a downward sloping demand curve, right? Okay. There are a few things that can cause, there are many things actually that can cause a demand curve to shift. We're going to look at 5 of them here, okay? The first one, start making a list up here, is change in consumers' income. Okay? So let's ask the question, what would happen if we started with this current demand curve, right? So this is in some market, okay, for some good, right? We have our demand curve showing us how much of the good is desired by consumers at the different prices. What would happen if suddenly all the consumers got a lot poorer? Okay, so suddenly everybody's income decreases. Well, I think it's fair to say that at every price of this good, consumers will probably desire less of it. Okay, so now to see what I mean by this, let's imagine that we have a society in which bread costs, or running shoes, let's use the example of running shoes. Running shoes cost $100, okay? And now suddenly everybody gets poorer. how many running shoes will be sold at $100? Is it more or fewer than before the decrease in income? Well, I think it's fewer, right? It's people will want less of those $100 running shoes than they would have before they got poorer. I mean, and so then I guess we could further ask, isn't that the same? Can't we come to the same conclusion, right? If the running shoes cost $150 or $175 or $200, I think the answer is yes. No matter how much the running shoes cost, quantity demanded of those running shoes will decrease when consumers' income decreases. Okay, so that is represented by an entire shift of the demand curve. So let's take all of these hypothetical prices here. Price 1, price 2, price 3, okay? We want to see a shift leftward, a downward shift in quantity demanded at every price when consumers' income goes down, okay? So at P3, we want quantity demanded to go from something here to something further down here, right? A decrease in quantity. Well, how do we represent this? Well, it's simply represented by a leftward shift of the demand curve, okay? The demand curve shifts to the left. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. There is a shift to the left in our demand curve when consumers' income goes down. And of course, if consumers' income goes up, well, then you would just have a rightward shift in the demand curve. Okay? Quantity demanded of running shoes will increase at every price when consumers get richer. All right? Okay. What is the second item on our list that can cause a shift in the entire demand curve? Well, the prices of other goods can also cause a shift in the demand curve. Okay? Well, this one is a little bit more complex than our income one, but not much more. I just erased my whole graph. Okay. There we go. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so I'm saying that the prices of other goods can cause the entire demand curve to shift. How so? Well, okay. There are two kinds of goods that we would normally talk about in economics. Okay, sorry. I shouldn't say there are two kinds of goods. There are two categories of goods that are relevant to this topic here. So there are substitutes in consumption, and there are complements in consumption. Okay? A substitute in consumption is just one good that can be substituted for another good. So the classic example of substitutes would be something like tea and coffee. Now, I'm sure many of you have strong preferences for either tea or coffee, but let's just pretend that, all you want in the morning is a hot drink. You don't really care if it's tea or coffee. In that case, tea and coffee would be substitutes. You either have one or you have the other. Complements are the exact opposite, okay? You consume the two goods together if they are complements in consumption. So an example of complements in consumption would be hot dogs and mustard, right? Or burgers, patties and burger buns, right? Those two things are consumed together. Or, beer and chicken wings, right? Two things that are consumed together. Those are complements in consumption. Okay, now let's think about what happens if two goods, okay, so let's say that this graph is the graph of good X, okay? Let's think about what happens when another good, call it good Y, either increases or decreases in price. Okay? Well, let's say that the price of y, now we're considering y as a substitute in consumption now. Let's say the price of y decreases. Well, this will cause, by the law of demand, okay, this will cause an increase in the quantity demanded of y, right? An increase in the quantity demanded of y. But because x and y are substitutes, this will in turn cause a decrease in the demand for x, right? Okay, let's go through that logic again. X and y are substitutes in consumption, right? So the consumer either wants to consume x or she wants to consume y, but not both. It's one or the other. Now let's say that, ceteris paribus, all else being equal, the price of y decreases. The law of demand says that the consumer will therefore want to consume more y. That's an increase in the quantity demanded of y right there, okay? But if the consumer is consuming more y, that would mean that there is less of a desire for x regardless of its price. Okay, so at every price, there is a decrease in the demand for x. So this would cause a leftward shift in the demand curve. Right? So when the price of a substitute decreases, the demand curve shifts to the left. And now, of course, we have the exact opposite thing happen if the price of a substitute goes up. So if the price of y is still a substitute, goes up, the law of demand says that the quantity demanded of y will go down, which will in turn cause an increase in the demand for x. Okay, so an increase in the price of a substitute will cause the demand curve to shift to the right. Okay, now I'm going to go through the logic of complements a little bit more quickly, but really, I think once you get the hang of one of them, you'll get the hang of both of them. So now let's say that x and y are complements, and the price of y goes down. Okay, well, this will, as usual, by the law of demand, cause the quantity demanded of y to go up. But now the consumer is consuming x and y together. So this will actually cause the desire for x to go up since the quantity demanded of y is going up, right? So a decrease in the price of a complement in consumption will cause a rightward shift of the demand curve. And of course, as you might infer, it's exactly the opposite for the case in which the price of a complement goes up. In this case, as usual, the quantity demanded of that good, y, will go down by the law of demand, which will in turn cause the demand for x to also go down, or we will have a leftward shift in the demand curve. Okay, so these are complements and substitutes. All right, what's the third item on our list of 5? Consumers' tastes. Okay, this one is pretty simple, right? If consumers suddenly like good X more than they did before, right? If they suddenly like good X more than they did before, then they will want more of good X at every price, right? So if consumers' tastes for whatever reason change, causing them to like the good more, that will cause a rightward shift in the demand curve, right? If consumers' tastes change such that they like the good less than they did before, then this will cause a leftward shift in the demand curve. That's pretty straightforward. Okay. Population is also relevant. All else being equal, right? If population goes up, you would expect there to be more people buying good X at every price. So population goes up, demand curve shifts to the right. Population goes down, demand curve shifts to the left, right? And then, of course, significant changes in weather. This one also self-explanatory. Let's say good X were winter boots. Well, when winter comes along, of course, the demand for winter boots will increase, and so therefore the demand curve will shift to the right. And then, of course, the demand for sandals, right, once the winter ends, will cause this demand curve for sandals to shift to the right. Of course, when winter starts, the demand for sandals will shift to the left, etc., right? So this is really on a case-by-case basis, but I think you get the general idea here, okay? I should make a small comment. I did so before, but I just wanted to emphasize, why is an increase in demand a shift to the right? Well, it's very, very simple, right? We're interested in how this quantity variable is changing. And because quantity is on the x-axis, a movement to the right just means more quantity, right? So if we want the quantity demanded of the good at every price to increase, we want to see a rightward shift along the x-axis, and therefore we want to see a rightward shift in the demand curve. All right? Okay, a final point on sort of jargon and vocabulary, okay? Again, I already mentioned this. I'm going to mention it again. Let's say that I tell you demand has increased. What am I saying? Demand has gone up. What I'm saying is that the entire curve shifted to the right. Demand refers to the entire curve. If I say quantity demanded has increased, then I am referring to a movement along the demand curve. Okay? Demand is a shift in the curve. Quantity demanded is a shift along the curve. Super important. Okay? Now, can we have both of these things simultaneously? The answer is yes. Let's say that so let's say we're talking about the market for coffee. And this year, there is a general health trend which says that coffee is terrible for you. Okay? So this would be an example of consumers' taste changing. That would, of course, cause a shift to the left in the demand curve. Consumers now no longer want to consume as much coffee at every price, right? Shift to the left in the demand curve. But what if I also told you that the price of coffee has decreased, right? Now, let's say the initial price of coffee were this. So, right, so the initial price of coffee were here. So that's P1, okay? And so, of course, if we held prices equal, right, ceteris paribus, consumers wanting less coffee changes the quantity demanded from Q1 down to Q2, right? Because the price for now hasn't changed. We're holding price constant, right? But now let's say I told you that price decreased. Let's say it decreased all the way down to P2 here. Well, now the new quantity demanded is actually going to be all the way out here. Q3, right? So what's happened here? Demand has decreased because of consumers' tastes, but quantity demanded has actually increased because the price has gone down. Okay, so we have an increase in demand, a decrease in demand, but an increase in quantity demanded. Okay, so this is just to illustrate the difference between demand and quantity demanded. Okay, so if you find it useful, please like and subscribe, and leave a comment down below if you have questions or if you have suggestions for further videos. And I will see you in the next video.